All right, Barrett Jones is going to join us now. The Alabama great, now with ESPN Radio, is with us. Barrett, what's up, man? How are you?
How we doing, guys?
Doing awesome. You doing all right?
Fantastic. Just enjoying my first StreamYard experience.
Yeah, I know. Is it everything you had hoped it would be?
It's awesome. Absolutely. What are you guys doing up there since you can't go to practice? Y'all just hanging out?
Pretty much. Dunaway has not been able to break down film because we're not allowed to practice, so he hasn't had a chance to break down Cincinnati yet. And
I know that's tough, Dunaway. What about? I guess LT didn't come, huh?
So he's a little under the weather. So he wasn't up for the trip.
Protocols. Get him protocols.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as we talk to you, you've digested a little more and more film. You had the Liberty Bowl last night. I don't know if we even want to go into that one. That was a yucky game.
Well, I'll tell you the greatest thing about the Liberty Bowl is I was home by 9:45 in my bed. I mean, or on my couch. That was if they were all right there, that'd be nice. But
yeah,
unfortunately, there's a lot of things I love about Memphis. The Liberty Bowl Stadium could use some upgrades in the press area. I don't know if you guys have been there in a while, but anyway, it was a tough game.
This is where Dunaway points out he doesn't go to normal bowl games.
I saw that on Dunaway. Dunaway is talking some trash on Twitter. I like feisty Dunaway.
Well, I in Barrett's referring to Daniel Holgerson's comments to start off his news conference yesterday in Birmingham after beating Auburn, and he had to wait 20 minutes. He said, I've been standing in the hallway for 20 minutes. Well, as I pointed out, when you go to the semifinals or the finals, your wait's going to be about 20 minutes before you do your post-game news conference, Coach. I know you may never win a national championship, but the losing coach is going to go first. You're going to be on the field as you were yesterday in Birmingham, getting a trophy. And then you come off and the losing news conference is underway, and then you wait your turn and you go. It's on your SID people if you're standing in the hallway and not waiting in the locker room or not sitting down with a nice Pepsi and a slice of pizza like Urban had to do one time. I mean, that's not on the Birmingham Bowl. That's not on the ESPN folks. That's on him.
What you're saying is if you're going to come at me, come correct. I like that.
That's right.
I like that about you, Jim.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the SEC first before we talk about the games that are coming up, the meaningful games that involve two SEC teams. Do you put any stock into a 0-4 start? Because Missouri was a pretty average football team, and they lost to Army. Tough matchup. UCF, that meant the world to them to beat Florida, but Florida was a pretty average or bad football team. Auburn loses to Houston. You saw Mississippi State lose to Texas Tech. You can't argue the SEC's 0-4, but do you put any stock in that? Does that matter at all to you?
It matters some, I guess. Ultimately, what's going to happen with SEC and their reputation, I guess, for this year will all hinge on what happens in these two semifinal games. I mean, look, if they have two teams in the national championship, it's going to be a hard sell to say the SEC was bad this year. So, the bowl games, I'll tell you what, I'm not a gambler, but if I were a gambler, the one thing I maybe would never bet on would be bowl games. I mean, you got to be a little crazy to bet on bowl games. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? There was nothing that told me on paper that Texas Tech with no coach, a bunch of guys, out, their best receiver not playing, their fourth quarterback of the year that was getting time, and they were going to go blow the doors off Mississippi State. Now, obviously, Mississippi State had 12 guys missing or whatever with virus protocols or maybe. And so that was obviously a factor. But, yeah, I don't put a lot of stock in it. I mean, clearly there's some teams that want to be there, some teams that don't. I think, that's on the coaching staff to get people fired up and ready to play. Look, the one thing I want to say about the Liberty Bowl, you got to give Sonny Cumbie and that staff a ton of credit. I mean, all those guys are leaving. They're going somewhere else, and somehow they got those guys motivated and fired up to go out there and beat the guy who was mouthing off and talking about how they had won 9 wins since he had been there. And I know they said all the right things pregame, but I guarantee that bothered them, and they wanted to go out there and show him that they didn't need him to win games.
Barrett Jones is with us. He joins us each week courtesy of Gus's World Famous Fried Chicken. Anytime you use the word famous, it means something. Gus's Fried Chicken is, in fact, that world famous. GusFriedChicken.com, GusFriedChicken.com, 2201 2nd Avenue South in Birmingham.
Brownie, I'll say real fast before you ask your question. Yeah. I'll tell you one guy that was a little flustered by it that I saw last night on the sidelines was Greg Sankey. He had just been at the Birmingham Bowl, and he does not fly commercial like the rest of us. He made his way to the Liberty Bowl and was there, and he was hoping that they could catch a win there. I kind of told him I felt good about his chances, and I lied to him because it didn't work out. So now, he certainly does not like being 0-4. So he cares.
Well, I mean, I think, look, I said this earlier, and this is not something I just say when the SEC starts losing bowl games. I think it's a horrible way to evaluate conference strength. Like you said, there's a reason it would be difficult to gamble on bowl games. You just don't know what you're getting. I understand Greg Sankey. He takes pride in his product. He wants his team to win, his teams to win every game they can play out of conference. Obviously, I get that, but I don't think just because the SEC is 0-4 that all of a sudden the SEC stinks. I think we determine that over 12 or 13 games, not one exhibition game that may or may not get played if people don't have enough guys due to COVID.
No, you're right, and I think that game last night was very close to not being played, as a lot of these bowl games are, from what I'm hearing. I'm just hoping we hang on until the end of the season because it's getting wild, and I think that anyway, this is a whole other rabbit hole, but I wonder if there's going to be a transition now to more of the NFL style of protocols in some of these conferences that are going to start either announcing or maybe even not announcing, and just going with, hey, if you feel sick, get tested. Otherwise, we're going to let it ride to try to get this thing finished. So anyway, that's for smarter people than I to think about and battle out.
Barrett Jones with us on the Pepsi hotline. I always feel like, and you played the position, that when we have games like Alabama and Cincinnati, that one of the places the disparity shows up most is on the line of scrimmage. I think that's where it is the biggest disparity, right or wrong. And when you play what's viewed as an inferior, and that's a shot at Cincinnati, I don't mean that. Does it show up most on the line?
I think usually it does. I think that's probably fair, is that normally there's not quite as much beef and girth, and especially depth. I think that's a big issue too. D-line is probably the place that, to me, for some reason, when you're playing non-SEC teams, when I was at Alabama, that was the place that showed up. Was they might have one or two good defensive linemen, but they didn't typically have the 2 deep and 3 deep that a lot of SEC defensive lines have, of just big bodies to roll in there. And hey, Cincinnati, I think that's certainly a factor for them. Like I think their starting 22 is pretty good. I really do. I think they've got some really quality players. I've been talking about this all week, that I think it's not a case where you have some quality group of 5 teams. They have a good system, something they all believe in. They kind of rally around. That's not really Cincinnati. I mean, they do have a system somewhat, but it's more just they have some really good football players, some guys that will play on Sunday for a long time, but they certainly don't have the depth, that Alabama has. And so I think defensive line-wise, they have some guys that can really rush the passes. They got a really good defensive end, but they don't have that 2 or 3 deep guys to roll in. And again, a solid offensive line, but they haven't seen anything like they're going to see up front for Alabama. And I will say this too, Alabama, the thing, went back and as I watched tape, Alabama's defensive line has really played a lot better, as the season has progressed. Probably hasn't gotten quite as much press as some of the other positions, deservedly so. But it's more than just Will Anderson now. There's some guys in the middle of that defensive line that have really come on here in the second half of this year and played some good football.
You played a long time at Alabama, and I'm wondering, I mean, this team has been riddled with some high-profile injuries, and it seems like during championship years of the past, there may have been one key injury along the way that the team had to overcome. In your time playing, do you remember one major injury that you thought, man, that's going to hurt us? We got to really sort of rally around and pull together and overcome that one. Was there one in your time in Tuscaloosa that you thought, man, that is a brutal injury for us?
Man, you're putting me on the spot right there. I don't know. I'd have to go back and think about somebody that got hurt. I'm trying to think of
the answer then is no. If it doesn't pop to mind that
we
that guy hurt.
We didn't have that many guys get hurt. The thing that the ones that I remember were 2 years in a row for us at the Rams, and LT. I wish you were here to react to this. We had Sam Bradford tear his ACL. That's absolutely brutal in the NFL when you lose your quarterback. That is a horrible feeling. So yeah, that's probably the ones I remember. But we never had a quarterback hurt. Mark Ingram missed a few games at the very beginning of the 2010 season, but it wasn't that big of a deal. We won all the games he missed. So I really don't remember a specific injury. Honestly, there probably was one I'm forgetting somewhere along the road. But
in other words, you were echoing what I'm saying. For the most part, when Alabama is on a championship run, they may have a injury or two along the way, but it seems like this team has overcome some really major injuries to get here this year.
Dante Hightower, didn't he miss a whole year? I think he missed a whole year somewhere.
He did.
2010, I think it was maybe. That's probably the one that comes to mind that hurt us, missing him. But maybe not quite to the level of I don't really ever remember us losing a guy that late in the year. Like John Mechie. To me, that's huge. I think it's enormous. It's going to be really interesting to me to see how Alabama reacts to it. Formationally, do we see more Jaleel Billingsley? Do we see more two tight end looks? Is one of those guys other than Brooks step up and play a little bit? I don't know, because I've talked about this on the show last time, but I think that Cincinnati's secondary is the strength of their defense. They're very good, and they have a lockdown corner who I think will be a top 20 pick in Chauncey Gardner. It will be very interesting to see, does he shadow Jamison Williams? They'll probably move him around, put him in a lot of spots formationally. So what does that look like? Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they react to that, because to me that is a big question. That's obviously, you look at Georgia and where did it all go wrong? They just couldn't run with those guys. They couldn't cover them, and the pass rush wasn't good enough. And Bryce Young had time to pick them apart down the field. So that'll be interesting if they can really commit to covering Jamison Williams, who are the other guys that kind of step up for Alabama. Losing Mechie to me is enormous, and I think it will definitely be felt, maybe especially early on in this game against Cincinnati.
Barrett Jones is with us. He is on the Pepsi Hotline. He joins us each week courtesy of Gus's World Famous Fried Chicken, 2201 2nd Avenue South. Grab some for the drive home. Great New Year's Eve party idea. Gus's World Famous Fried Chicken, GusFriedChicken.com. That's GusFriedChicken.com. How big an advantage is it for Alabama? And Nick Saban has done a great job at building depth in his staff and having football guys around the building. I know you've got a history with Joe Pendry. When Doug Marrone has to step out, you bring in an experienced guy like Joe Pendry that can kind of, to use a football term, keep the ball moving down the field, and you don't have a huge hiccup there.
Yeah, I mean, it's enormous. Obviously, that's one of the things that advantages that Alabama certainly has against anybody in the country. There's other schools that have done similar, but they've got a massive bench of analysts, and they've got analysts that have been like head coaches other places and coordinators, and so that's huge to have a guy like that step in. Coach Pendry was my offensive line coach when I first got to Alabama, so I know he's very capable of coaching the offensive line and does a fantastic job. So yeah, that's a big deal, and it's also a big deal just on that subject. Like I know that Coach Saban does not have any of the players looking forward, but I guarantee you that all those analysts have, once they got done with Cincinnati tape, they're already working on building a book for, especially Michigan. Obviously, they've already played Georgia, so they probably already got a book on them. But building a book on Michigan, it's funny. Like I've heard in this kind of situations, they'll have they build these massive books of information. One of them usually never comes to fruition. Obviously, the team that loses, you don't end up playing. You might just, as an analyst, put in hundreds of hours of work that gets tossed in the trash if you don't play that team. So that's an advantage too, to have guys like that are working on it, so that when you do move on a semi-short week turnaround for a national championship game, you already have some preparation in the books.
Bill O'Brien missed a little time. He's back. The staff is almost completely whole now. So the preparation is moving in the right direction. He said yesterday how much he trusts Bryce Young to do anything and to make calls at the line and check out of plays. And I know that that's not always the case with offensive coordinators and quarterbacks. Are we to the point, and this is an on-the-spot question again, are we to the point, if I said all Saban team, we're putting it together, and at quarterback, I put Bryce Young? Am I out of whack saying Bryce Young, when we do the all Saban team, when it's all said and done, he could be the guy that ends up being ahead of AJ, ahead of Greg, ahead of, all the other national championship winners, including the first round draft pick, Mac Jones and Tua? I mean, is there a chance this kid is the all Saban team quarterback when Nick's time's done in Tuscaloosa?
Absolutely, there's a chance. With the success of those guys you just named, the reality is that a lot of that's going to be dependent on how this thing finishes. I do think that probably in my memory, I think more has been put on Bryce Young than any of the guys you just listed. I mean, Bryce Young really has had to carry this team a lot this year, whereas in years past there was so much talent around. It was such an obvious. I've gotten criticized for fans because I've said this before. I mean, obviously, look, there's still a lot of talent in this Alabama team. I'm not saying that they're not talented. I mean, they're still very talented. But, I look at, I've done this with some friends actually, kind of thinking about, okay, an all Saban team. How many of these guys would be on an all Saban team, on this team? And there's not a ton of them, really, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, Will Anderson probably, you put him on there, and maybe Bryce Young. And then, James Williams, yeah, he's a great player. There's a lot of great receivers. That's a tough one, So how many of those guys would actually be on there? I think more has been put on Bryce Young. He has had to put the team on his back so many times this year, and that's part of what separated him. But again, it's all going to be about how it finishes, because there's still a tough road left, and obviously have to get past a good Cincinnati team and either a Michigan team or a Georgia team that you've already seen. So it's a big road to go, but I think that certainly will be a conversation worth having if they're able to finish this thing off.
All right, he is Barrett Jones. You will hear him on the ESPN radio call of this upcoming game Friday. Alabama taking on Cincinnati, 2:30 from AT&T Stadium just down the road here in Arlington. Barrett, we'll see you at Jerry World Friday, man. Safe travels.
I'll see you there. What's the media hotel? Where are you guys right now?
It's the Omni.
Oh, man, big time.
You ever stayed in the Omni? It's a nice hotel.
I have stayed there. I can't afford it, so I'll be in the Hilton over there by the it's where ESPN put me. I wanted to be in that. Have you guys been to that new Live by Lowe's hotel over there and gone and seen the like Ballpark Village area kind of deal over there by the Ranger Stadium? If you haven't,
I have not.
Yeah, that's out in Arlington, right?
It's very cool. I know it's a little far from you guys, but you need to go there before the game. There's a lot of good barbecue restaurants right around the stadium. Really cool setup. That's where we stayed for the Big 12 championship, and you walk over to the game. It was awesome. But anyway, that's a free commercial for Live, whatever it's called.
I mean, I'm all about it. We may try it today. Dunaway was asking for my plans later today, and I had no plans. So you may have just given us plans.
The brisket at Lockhart Barbecue. Go over there when the show's over. Go ahead and brisket up. It's good.
Done it. Everybody makes a big deal out of Pecan Lodge. Lockhart's will have a little bit of a line too. It's phenomenal. I bet
they've got one at Live. They've got one there inside. So that's what I'm saying. Go over there.
Okay.
Get one at Live and watch games up on the big screens. Pretty cool.
All right. Great idea by Barrett. We'll put it on the list. Thank you, Barrett. We'll see you Friday, man.
All right, guys. See you later.
All right. That is Barrett Jones with us, courtesy of Gus's world famous fried chicken. He joins us each week, GusFriedChicken.com. That is GusFriedChicken.com. Like all of our guests, Barrett appeared on the Pepsi Hotline.